She was only 16 years old when she had to choose between saving her parents or saving herself. 22 years later, they took her to court claiming that she had abandoned them on purpose and destroyed their lives. But the truth behind that night of fire was much darker than anyone could have imagined. If you enjoy real and emotional stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any incredible story like this one. And tell me in the comments, would you be able to forgive your parents for something like that? The small town of Meadowbrook, in the interior of California, had never experienced a summer like that. It was August 2003, and the thermometer had not dropped below 110 degrees Fahrenheit, about 43 degrees Celsius for almost 3 consecutive weeks. The asphalt of Route 41, which cut through the town from north to south, melted under the relentless sun, forming black bubbles that burst under the tires of the few cars that passed. The trees around the rural properties were as dry as tissue paper. Leaves fell brown and brittle before even reaching the ground. Local news from KFSN-TV constantly warned about the extreme risk of wildfires, but no one in Meadowbrook really believed that something so catastrophic could happen there. Meadowbrook was one of those little towns forgotten by time, where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were kept in heavy silences and averted glances. The population did not exceed 1,200 inhabitants. There was only one school, Meadowbrook Elementary and High School, 2 churches, the Meadowbrook Baptist Church and a small Methodist chapel, a gas station called Billy's Gas and Go, and a little market called Harper's General Store, run by the same family for 3 generations. Life there was simple, slow, and predictable. Most people lived on properties scattered across the hills around the town, surrounded by dense forests of pines, oaks, and wild shrubs that, in that hellish summer, had become a gigantic stockpile of natural fuel just waiting for a spark to explode into uncontrollable flames. Sarah Mitchell was 16 years old. That fateful August, she was a thin, medium-height girl with long dark brown hair that she always tied back in a practical ponytail. Her green eyes were inherited from her mother, but they carried a constantly worried expression, as if she were always calculating the next problem she would need to solve. Sarah was the type who took on too many responsibilities for her age. She took care of the house, did the shopping, cooked when her mother couldn't get out of bed, helped her father with basic property maintenance, studied to keep her grades above a B+, and still found time to work part-time at the Meadowbrook Public Library, organizing books and helping elderly patrons find Western novels. Her parents, Thomas and Margaret Mitchell, were complicated people. Thomas, at 52, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with calloused hands from decades working as an auto mechanic. He owned a small workshop called Mitchell's Auto Repair, located at the entrance of town, about 15 miles from the property where they lived. Thomas was a man of few words and many unspoken expectations. He spent weekends drinking Budweiser on the worn wooden porch of the house, staring at the hills with a permanent expression of bitterness, complaining about life, the government, taxes, and how the world had changed for the worse. Margaret, at 48, was a shadow of what she used to be. She had been an English teacher at the local school until a serious car accident in 1998. When Sarah was only 11. Since then, she had lived with chronic back and neck pain, retired on disability, medicated with Vicodin for the pain, and Xanax for the anxiety. Margaret spent her days watching soap operas on the living room's tube television, smoking Marlboro Light cigarettes, and wandering through the house in a worn flannel robe, even in the unbearable heat. She had given up on herself, and everyone knew it. The Mitchell house sat on top of a small hill accessed by a dirt road branching off Route 40. It was a 3-acre property, about 12,000 square meters, surrounded by rotting wooden fences and dense forests that stretched for miles in all directions. The house itself was a 2-story wooden structure, painted and peeling white, with a red-tiled roof that had needed urgent repairs for at least 5 years. There were visible cracks in the exterior walls, windows that didn't close properly, doors that creaked, and a front porch that groaned under any weight. But it was all they had. Thomas had inherited that property from his father, Harold Mitchell, and to him, it represented more than just a house. It was proof that he was not a complete failure in life. Sarah woke up on the morning of August 22, 2003, with a strange feeling in her chest. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier than usual, charged with an invisible electricity that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She pulled back the thin curtains of her small upstairs bedroom and looked out the window. The sky had a sickly orange hue, as if the sun were bleeding through a layer of smoke that wasn't yet visible to the eyes, but that the body instinctively felt. She went down the creaking stairs and entered the kitchen. Her mother was sitting at the worn wooden table, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred a cup of coffee that had been cold for hours. Margaret was wearing the same old robe as always. Her gray hair was messy, and she had a vacant look in her eyes. "Did you hear the radio this morning?" Margaret asked without looking up from the cup. "No? Why? What happened?" Sarah opened the old refrigerator, which hummed too loudly, and grabbed a bottle of orange juice. "There's a big wildfire near Redwood Valley. They said on the radio that the wind could bring the flames here, could reach us today." Sarah felt an immediate tightening in her stomach. Redwood Valley was only 30 miles north of Meadowbrook, and that summer, the wind blew constantly southward, strong and relentless. Does Dad know about this? He already left for work before 6. You know how he is. Thinks these things never happened to us. Thinks we're special or something. Sarah looked out the kitchen window that faced the back of the property. The forest around them seemed too quiet. No birds singing, no wind in the leaves, just a heavy, unnatural silence. And there was a smell, a distant smell of burning wood, faint still, but unmistakable. I'm going to school, but if you hear anything on the radio, any evacuation order, call me at the office, okay? Margaret nodded. But Sarah knew her mother would probably go back to the couch and spend the whole day watching the Young and the Restless until she fell asleep with her mouth open. Sarah grabbed her worn backpack, put in a notebook, some pens, and a bottle of water. She left through the front door and walked to the dirt road where the school bus would pick her up at 7:15 a.m. The yellow bus number 12 arrived on time, creaking and squeaking. The driver, Mr. Daniels, a black man of nearly 60, with reading glasses hanging from his neck, waved at her. Good morning, Sarah. Hot as hell again today, huh? Always is, Mr. Daniels. She sat down in a middle seat on the bus, alone, and looked out the window as the vehicle went down the hill and onto Route 41 toward the school. The sky still had that strange color, and the smoke she had seen in the morning seemed closer now, forming a thick line on the northern horizon. The school was eerily quiet when Sarah arrived. There were fewer students than usual. Some teachers stood in tense groups in the hallways. During the first class Algebra 2 with Mrs. Patterson, no one paid attention. Everyone kept looking out the window. The column of smoke on the horizon was growing. It was no longer a thin line. It was a thick, black tower rising into the sky, undulating and expanding like a living creature. At lunch break, Sarah and her classmates gathered in the school parking lot. Everyone talked about the fire. My dad said, there are already over 50,000 acres burning, said Jake Russo, a senior known for being dramatic, and the wind's at 40 miles an hour. This fire could be here before nightfall. You always exaggerate, Jake retorted Amy Chen, an Asian American girl with round glasses, trying to laugh, but her voice sounded nervous and high-pitched. Sarah said nothing. She just kept staring north, smelling the smoke growing stronger by the minute. Her heart was racing. Something bad was coming. At 2:30 p.m., the school loudspeakers crackled with static. Attention, students and staff. By order of the Fresno County Emergency Department, this school is being evacuated immediately. All students must return home and await further instructions. Please leave in an orderly and quick manner. Panic was instant. Students ran to lockers, grabbed backpacks, shouted names. Parents started appearing in the parking lot, honking, waving frantically. Sarah ran to the bus stop, but Mr. Daniels was standing next to the yellow bus, shaking his head. No route today. Girl, supervisor's orders. You'll have to find another ride home. Panic rose in Sarah's throat like bile. She lived too far to walk, 15 miles, and her parents didn't have a cell phone. Thomas thought cell phones were for weak people who don't know how to work. She looked around, desperate, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Sarah, come. Amy Chen's voice cut through the chaos. She was waving frantically from inside a light blue Honda Civic. Her mother, Mrs. Chen, was at the wheel, tense. Sarah ran to the car and got into the back seat. Thank you so much, she said, breathless. We'll take you home, dear. Where do you live? Asked Mrs. Chen, already turning the car to leave the parking lot. On Route 41, past mile 12. There's a dirt road on the left. It's the only house at the top of the hill. Mrs. Chen nodded and accelerated. Traffic was chaotic. Cars crowded the road, horns blared, people shouted from windows. Sarah looked back and saw the black smoke now covering half the sky. She could see small orange embers glowing at the base of the column. The fire was closer than anyone had imagined. When they reached the dirt road that led to the Mitchell house, Mrs. Chen hesitated. Are you sure it's safe up there? It looks very isolated. My parents are there. It'll be fine. Thank you for the ride. Sarah got out of the car, closed the door, and started running up the dirt road. The Chen car turned around and disappeared onto Route 41. Sarah ran with her backpack bouncing on her back, her sneakers kicking up clouds of dust. The smell of smoke was unbearable now. She could taste the ashes in her mouth. When she reached the top of the hill, she saw her father's red Ford F-150 parked in front of the house. He was home, thank God. Sarah went in through the open front door. Mom, Dad, did you see the news? We need to leave now. She found her mother in the living room, still on the couch, watching the television. Margaret was watching an emergency broadcast. Helicopter footage showed a gigantic wall of fire advancing through the northern forests. The caption on the screen read, Wildfire out of control, mandatory evacuations in Meadowbrook and surrounding areas. Mom, we need to leave now. Margaret turned slowly, her eyes glazed with medication. Your father's upstairs. He's getting things. Sarah ran upstairs. She found Thomas in the master bedroom, opening drawers, throwing papers and folders into an old cardboard box. Dad, what are you doing? We need to go now. I'm not leaving without my documents. Sarah, Thomas shouted, sweaty and red. Everything I have is here. The house deeds, the insurance policies, my father's will, the certificates, everything. If this house burns and I lose these papers, we have nothing. Do you understand? Nothing. We can take all that and leave. Put it in a suitcase. Let's go. It's not just that. Thomas was almost hysterical now. There are the tools in the shed, the parts from the shop I brought home. The tractor from my father, there's Dad. None of that matters if we die. Thomas ignored her completely. He went downstairs with the box of papers and headed for the shed out back. Sarah ran after him, screaming, Dad, Dad, please. She went back inside. Her mother was still on the couch. Mom, get up. We need to go to the car now. Margaret looked at her with empty eyes. I can't. Sarah, my back, I took the meds. I can't drive? I can't. Then I'll drive. I have my learner's permit. Let's go. Margaret shook her head slowly. Your father won't leave. He never does. You know that. Sarah felt something break inside her, a mix of despair, anger, and pure terror. She ran to the front window. The horizon was on fire, literally. A continuous line of orange and red flames advanced through the hills, consuming whole trees in seconds. The roar of the fire was audible now, a deep, monstrous sound, like a freight train tearing through the earth. Sarah ran outside and shouted at her father in the shed, Dad, the fire's here. Look, it's coming this way. Thomas came out of the shed carrying a box full of tools. He looked at the horizon and froze. For a moment, Sarah saw fear in his eyes, but then he shook his head. There's still time. I just need 15 more minutes. 15 minutes. Dad, we don't have 5. I won't lose everything my father built. I won't. He went back into the shed. Sarah stood there, trembling, tears streaming down her face. She could feel the heat of the flames now. The wind was bringing embers, small burning pieces of wood falling like hot snow around her. An ember landed on the roof of the house, then another, and another. Sarah ran back inside. Mom, get up now, please. Margaret finally stood, trembling, holding onto the furniture. Sarah pulled her by the hand and led her to the front door, but Margaret stopped. I can't leave your father. He's my husband. I can't. Then let's get him together. Come on. They ran to the shed. Thomas was trying to tie a tarp over a pile of boxers in the truck bed. Thomas, let's go. Margaret shouted with a force Sarah hadn't heard in years. Just one more minute. That's when Sarah heard the noise. A loud boom like thunder, but continuous. She turned and saw the forest behind the house explode in flames. A 50-foot wall of fire advanced directly toward them, devouring trees, bushes, and everything in its path. Dad, now. Sarah screamed with everything she had. Thomas finally dropped the tarp and ran to the truck cab. Get in now. Sarah practically threw her mother into the passenger seat and climbed in after her. Thomas started the engine, but the truck sputtered. Once, twice, no, he muttered, turning the key frantically. On the third try, the engine roared to life. Thomas slammed the accelerator, and the truck sped down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust and stones. Sarah looked out the back window. The house was on fire. The entire roof was engulfed. The windows exploded. And then, within seconds, the entire structure collapsed in a burst of wood and ashes. It was all gone. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, leave a comment below telling me what you think will happen. Will her parents finally admit their mistake? Or will the guilt weigh on them forever? Comment now. I read them all. They managed to reach Route 41, but the road was completely jammed. Hundreds of cars, trucks, trailers, all trying to escape at the same time. The smoke was so dense that you could barely see 10 yards ahead. People honked, screamed, cried. Sarah saw entire families running on foot along the roadside, carrying luggage, children, pets. Thomas managed to move forward slowly, swerving around abandoned cars. They passed the school. The building was on fire. They passed the Baptist church. Flames climbed up the steeple. They passed Harper's General Store. It was in ruins. Meadowbrook was being wiped off the map. After nearly 2 hours of hellish traffic, they finally reached a checkpoint set up by the California Highway Patrol and firefighters. An officer waved for them to stop. Thomas rolled down the window. How long ago did you leave the fire zone? The officer asked, wearing a respirator mask. Just now. Our house burned down. Thomas said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. Go on to Fresno. There's an emergency shelter at the Fresno State University gym. You'll get food, water, and a place to sleep. Thomas nodded and drove on. Nobody spoke for the rest of the trip. Sarah looked out the window, watching the smoke cover everything behind them. She felt a strange emptiness in her chest. It wasn't sadness. It was something worse. It was the feeling that something fundamental had been broken and would never be fixed again. They arrived at the shelter around 10 p.m. There were hundreds of people there. Families, elderly, crying children, all with the same expression of shock and loss. Red Cross volunteers handed out blankets, water, and sandwiches. Sarah took 3 blankets and found a quiet corner in the gym. She spread the blankets on the cold wooden floor. Her mother lay down immediately, curling up and turning her back. Thomas sat staring into nothing, his hands trembling. Sarah sat down beside him. "Dad, we're alive. That's what matters." Thomas turned to her slowly. There was something cold and hard in his eyes. "You don't understand anything, Sarah. What do you mean? If you had given me more time, if you hadn't been screaming and panicking, I could have saved everything. The deeds, the insurance documents, everything." Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "Dad, the fire was literally on top of us. If we had stayed one more minute, we would have died. You don't know that?" "Yes, I do. I saw it. The house collapsed seconds after we left." Thomas looked away. "You panicked, and now we lost everything." Sarah felt the tears return, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from anger. "You're blaming me. Is that it?" Thomas didn't answer. He just lay down, turning his back on her. Sarah sat there, alone, in the gym full of strangers, listening to the sound of muffled crying and coughing from the smoke. She was 16 years old. She had just survived the worst natural disaster in her region's history, and her own parents were blaming her for their survival. That was the night Sarah Mitchell understood that some families don't survive tragedies. Some just burn from the inside. The days following the fire were a gray haze of confusion, pain, and displacement. The Meadowbrook Wildfire, as it was officially named, burned for 11 more consecutive days before finally being contained. Altogether, it consumed 87,000 acres of forest, destroyed 412 homes, 3 schools, 14 businesses, and killed 6 people who couldn't evacuate in time. Meadowbrook ceased to exist as a functioning town. What remained were scorched foundations, solitary chimneys rising from the ashes like tombstones, and charred trees stretching their black branches to the sky like skeleton fingers. Sarah and her parents spent 3 weeks in the emergency shelter at the Fresno State University Gymnasium. It was a surreal period of suspended existence. Hundreds of people crammed into a space designed for sports events, sleeping on thin mats on the floor, standing in line for portable toilets, eating meals prepared by volunteers. The smell of smoke clung to everything: clothes, hair, skin. No matter how many times Sarah showered in the communal facilities, she still smelled the burned wood in her nostrils. Thomas spent those 3 weeks in a state of silent rage. He hardly spoke to anyone. He spent hours sitting outside the gym, smoking cigarettes borrowed from other displaced people, staring at the horizon as if he could turn back time through sheer force of will. When FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, set up assistance stations inside the shelter, Thomas was among the first to line up. Sarah went with him. They sat across from a FEMA representative, a middle-aged Latina woman named Rosa Delgado, who wore an official badge and had a professionally compassionate expression on her face. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry for the loss of your home," Rosa began, typing information into an old laptop. "I'll need some information to process your assistance request. First, did you have homeowner's insurance?" Thomas nodded. "I did, with State Farm, but..." He stopped, and Sarah saw his jaw tighten. "But what, sir?" "The policy documents were in the house. Everything burned. I don't have the policy number. I don't have a copy. Nothing." Rosa nodded, unsurprised. "That's common in situations like this. Don't worry. We'll contact State Farm using your personal information. They'll have records. It may take a few weeks, but we'll get it." "A few weeks?" Thomas asked, his voice rising. "I don't have a place to live. I don't have clothes. I don't have anything." "A few weeks, sir? I understand your frustration. That's why FEMA is here. We can provide immediate assistance with temporary housing. We also have vouchers for clothes, food, and basic needs. It's not much, but it will help while the insurance is processed." Thomas took a deep breath, clearly trying to control his anger. "How long until the insurance pays out?" "That depends on the insurer, the extent of the damage, the available documentation. It can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months, sometimes more." 6 months. Thomas nearly shouted. People around them turned their heads. Sarah put her hand on her father's arm. "Dad, at least they'll help us now. We'll get through this." Thomas pushed her hand away, stood up, and left the table without another word. Rosa sighed and looked at Sarah with pity. "He'll be okay. Everyone's dealing with trauma. You're a strong family." Sarah just nodded, but inside she knew the truth. They weren't a strong family. They never had been. And now, stripped of everything, the cracks were turning into chasms. Margaret wasn't coping any better. If before the fire she had already spent most of her time in a medicated state of semi-consciousness, now she was completely detached from reality. She refused to eat, refused to talk to social workers. She lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling, murmuring incomprehensible things. When Sarah tried to talk to her, Margaret just turned her head. A volunteer nurse named Karen Stevens, who worked shifts at the shelter, pulled Sarah aside one day. "Honey, your mother needs psychiatric help. She's showing signs of severe depression and possible dissociation. I can refer her to a professional. She already takes meds for that," Sarah replied, exhausted. "I know, but the meds she had were lost in the fire, right? She needs new prescriptions, new dosage adjustments. Without medication, her condition will worsen." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of yet another responsibility fall on her shoulders. "I'll try to talk to her." But talking to Margaret was like talking to a wall. Eventually, Karen managed to have a visiting psychiatrist evaluate Margaret and prescribe new medications as a loft for depression and an adjusted dose of Xanax for anxiety. The medication helped a little, but Margaret remained a ghostly presence. Drifting through the shelter without purpose or energy, Sarah tried to maintain some normalcy. She was still only 16, technically still a high school student, but Meadowbrook Elementary and High School no longer existed. It had been consumed by the fire. The county school administration was trying to organize temporary classes in trailers set up on a football field in Clovis, a nearby town, but it would take weeks before everything was ready. In the meantime, Sarah spent her days helping other displaced people in the shelter. She organized clothing, donations, helped distribute meals, played with small children whose parents were busy dealing with insurance and government aid bureaucracy. She did all this because if she stopped, she would have to face the reality of her own situation, and that was unbearable. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the fire, Sarah was sorting through a pile of donated clothes when she saw Amy Chen and her mother enter the gym. Amy carried 2 large bags. When her eyes met Sarah's, she ran and hugged her tightly. "Sarah, thank God you're okay. I tried to find you before, but they weren't allowing non-displaced people into the shelter, until now." Sarah felt the tears coming but held them back. "Thank you for giving me a ride that day. If I had stayed at school..." "Don't think about that," Amy interrupted. "You're alive. That's what matters. Look, my mom and I brought some things for you. Clothes, hygiene products, an old phone you can keep. It's not much, but Amy, this is too much. Thank you. Thank you so much." They sat on a bench and talked for almost an hour. Amy said her family was fine. Their house was farther south, outside the destruction zone. They had to evacuate but returned 2 days later to find everything intact. Her school, a private one in Fresno, was unaffected. "And you? How are your parents?" Amy asked. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to admit the truth either. "They're coping." "And you?" Sarah forced a smile. "Me too," but she wasn't. Inside, she was falling apart. After 3 weeks, FEMA managed to arrange temporary housing for the Mitchell family. They were moved into a trailer in a hastily built temporary trailer park on a vacant lot on the outskirts of Fresno. The trailer was small, 2 tiny bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, a bathroom barely big enough for one person, and a living room that doubled as everything else. The walls were paper thin. You could hear the neighbors coughing, arguing, crying, but it was better than the gym floor. Thomas managed to return to work at Mitchell's auto repair. Rather, what was left of it? The building was partially standing, but all the equipment inside had been damaged by smoke and heat. The commercial insurance covered part of the damages, but not all. Thomas had to take out a loan to buy new tools and parts. He worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to rebuild the business. Margaret couldn't do anything. She stayed in the trailer all day, watching TV or sleeping. Sarah went back to school now in temporary classes in Clovis trailers, but it was hard to concentrate. She took 2 different buses to get there, nearly 2 hours of travel each day. She came home exhausted, made dinner because Margaret no longer cooked, cleaned the trailer, did homework, and collapsed into bed. The months passed. October, November, December. Christmas 2003 was the most depressing of Sarah's life. There was no tree, no presents. Thomas worked on December 25th. Margaret lay in bed. Sarah ate instant noodles alone while watching It's a Wonderful Life on a small tube TV. It was during this time that the blame began to be spoken aloud. One night in January 2004, Sarah was washing dishes in the tiny kitchen sink when Thomas came into the trailer. He smelled of motor oil and sweat. He tossed his keys on the counter and opened the fridge, grabbing a can of Coors Light. "How much money do you have saved?" he suddenly asked. Sarah turned, confused. "What? You worked at the library? You must have some money saved." "I have about $300 in my account." "Why?" Thomas drank half the beer in one go. "I need money. The insurance didn't cover everything. They said there was missing documentation. Said I should have kept digital copies, safe copies, whatever. Said they'll only pay 60% of what I claimed." Sarah felt her stomach drop. But they can't do that. We lost everything." "They can, and they are," Thomas replied bitterly. "And you know why there was missing documentation, Sarah? Because someone panicked and forced me to run out without grabbing what I needed." Sarah froze. You're blaming me again." "Dad, we would have died if you don't know that," Thomas shouted, slamming the beer can on the counter. Foam splattered. "You were 16. You didn't know anything. But you kept screaming, crying, rushing me, and now I'm screwed. We're screwed." Margaret appeared in the bedroom doorway, eyes wide. "Thomas, stop." "Stop what, Margaret? Stop telling the truth?" If she'd given me 10 more minutes, just 10 minutes, I would have saved everything. The deeds, the documents, everything. "Dad," the house collapsed. Sarah shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I saw it seconds after we left. It collapsed. If we'd stayed, we'd be dead. You were a child. You panicked. I saved our lives." Silence. Thomas looked at her with something Sarah had never seen in his eyes before. It was contempt, pure contempt. "You saved our lives so we could live." In this, he gestured around the miserable trailer. This is a life. Sarah couldn't hold it in anymore. She ran to the tiny bedroom she shared, locked the door, and cried until there were no more tears. That was the first of many similar arguments. The months dragged on. Sarah turned 17 in March 2004, but there was no celebration. She kept going to school, earning good grades because it was the only thing she could control. She applied for college scholarships, knowing she couldn't count on any financial help from her parents. Thomas kept working nonstop, but his bitterness grew. He started drinking more. Every night after work, he bought a six-pack and drank alone on the trailer's tiny porch. Sometimes, he looked at Sarah with that same expression of silent resentment. He never yelled at her again after that night, but he didn't need to. His silence was worse. Margaret was deteriorating. She stopped taking her medication properly, stopped going to follow-up appointments, spent whole days in bed. Sarah tried to help, but Margaret pushed her away. Once, Sarah tried to convince her to eat something, and Margaret turned to her and said, "Why do you care? You didn't care enough to save our things that night." Sarah felt as if she'd been stabbed. "Mom, I begged you to leave. You should have helped your father. You should have carried things. You only thought about yourself." Sarah walked out of the room and sat on the hallway floor, hugging her knees, trembling. She was 17. She had survived a natural disaster, and her own parents hated her for it. In May 2005, Sarah graduated high school. The ceremony was held in a borrowed gym since the school was still being rebuilt. Thomas didn't go, said he had work. Margaret went but sat in the back, staring into nothing, and left before Sarah got her diploma. Sarah received a full scholarship to California State University, Sacramento nicknamed Sac State. She had applied for social work programs, thinking about helping people like her people who survived trauma and needed to rebuild their lives. When she told her parents, the reaction was nothing. Thomas just nodded. "Sacramento's far. 2.5 hours by car," Sarah replied. "I'll come back on holidays." "Sure you will," Thomas said, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe it. Margaret said nothing. She just turned and went back to her room. In August 2005, Sarah packed her things, which wasn't much. Since she owned almost nothing, took a Greyhound bus from Fresno to Sacramento. It was 165 miles, but to Sarah, it might as well have been 10,000. She was leaving behind not just a destroyed town, but a family that blamed her for being alive. As the bus pulled away, Sarah looked out the window and saw the burned hills around Fresno. 2 years had passed since the fire, but the vegetation still hadn't fully returned. There were still charred areas, dead trees, scars on the land, just as there were scars on her. Sarah swore to herself that day she would build a new life. A life where she wasn't blamed, a life where she could breathe. She didn't know that, 20 years later, the past would come to collect in ways she could never have imagined. Sacramento greeted Sarah Mitchell with the indifference of a big city. No one knew her story. No one knew about the fire, the blame, the destroyed family. To the thousands of students walking across the California State University, Sacramento campus, Sarah was just another freshman trying to find her way. And that was exactly what she needed. The campus sat on the banks of the Sacramento River, surrounded by leafy trees and red brick buildings. It was beautiful, green, alive, the complete opposite of the charred landscapes Sarah had left behind. She settled into a shared dorm in Draper Hall, sharing a tiny room with a girl named Jessica Torres, a journalism student from Los Angeles who talked too fast, laughed too loud, but had a kind heart. "So, where are you from?" Jessica asked, while unpacking an impressive number of clothes and shoes. "Fresno," Sarah answered, tucking her few t-shirts into a drawer. "Oh, Fresno. I passed through there going to Yosemite once. Hot as hell, right?" "Yeah, very hot." Sarah didn't mention the fire, didn't mention the lost home, didn't mention her parents, and Jessica, too busy with her own life, didn't ask further. The first months at Sac State were intense adaptation. Sarah threw herself into her studies with an almost obsessive determination. She enrolled in psychology, sociology, and social work courses. She wanted to understand trauma. She wanted to understand dysfunctional families. She wanted to understand why some people recovered from disasters and others didn't. She worked part-time at the campus library, something familiar and comforting. She shelved books, helped students find references, and spent hours studying in silence among the stacks. Her minimum wage salary of $6.75 an hour barely covered basic expenses, but she supplemented it with her scholarship and avoided spending money on anything non-essential. Sarah didn't go to parties, didn't drink, didn't go out. While Jessica and other dorm mates spent weekends at bars and fraternity parties, Sarah stayed in the room or in the library, studying or reading. Jessica tried to convince her sometimes. "Sarah, you need to relax. Come with us tonight. It'll be fun." "I need to study for abnormal psychology." "You always need to study. You're like a machine. It's not healthy." Sarah just smiled politely. "I'm fine, promise." But she wasn't fine. She was building walls. Thick, high walls around herself, keeping the world at a safe distance. She didn't make close friends, didn't trust anyone enough to share her story, and above all, she didn't talk to her family. During her first semester, Sarah called home only twice. Both times, Thomas answered, "Hello. Hi, Dad. It's me." Heavy silence on the other end. "How are you?" Sarah asked, forcing her voice to sound normal. "Working. Always working. You classes are going well. I got A's on most of my first month exams. Good for you." Another silence. "And Mom, she's the same. Is she taking her meds?" "Sometimes, Dad. She needs to take them every day." The psychiatrist said. "I know what the psychiatrist said, Sarah. I don't need you reminding me." Sarah bit her lip, feeling the old anger rise. "I'm just worried." "Then maybe you should have stayed here to help instead of running off to Sacramento." The line went silent. Sarah felt the tears burn but didn't let her voice crack. "I didn't run off. I went to college. Call it what you want." And then he hung up. Sarah sat in the dorm hallway, holding the old cell phone Amy Chen had given her, heartbreaking all over again. She didn't call back for months. Christmas 2005 came, and Sarah didn't go home. She told herself it was because she didn't have money for the bus fare. But the truth was she couldn't bear the idea of going back to that trailer, to that accusatory silence, to those resentful looks. She spent Christmas alone in the empty dorm. Most students had gone home to their families. Jessica was in Los Angeles. Sarah ate instant noodles and watched Miracle on 34th Street on a borrowed laptop. She cried herself to sleep. The years went by. Sarah continued her degree with absolute focus. She excelled academically, receiving praise from professors and strong recommendations for graduate programs. She interned at shelters for domestic violence victims, homeless assistance centers, and support programs for natural disaster survivors. It was during one of those internships, in 2007, that Sarah met David Chano, relation to Amy Chen, but coincidentally also from an Asian American family. David was a veteran social worker, 10 years older than Sarah, working for the American Red Cross in post-disaster recovery programs. They met at a volunteer training after severe floods in Northern California. David was calm, patient, and incredibly competent. He had a way of speaking to trauma survivors that made people feel heard and safe. Sarah was impressed. After the training, they had coffee together at a small cafe near the Red Cross office. "You're really good at this," David said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Working with trauma. You have natural empathy. Have you worked with this before?" Sarah hesitated. It was the first time in years that someone had asked a question that came close to her past. "I survived the Meadowbrook fire. In 2003, David stopped stirring his coffee and looked at her. "Really? I remember that fire. It was devastating." "You lived there?" "I did. I lost my house. I lost a lot." David nodded slowly, understanding. "That's why you do this. That's why you want to help." "Yes," Sarah admitted. "I know what it's like. I know how people look at you differently afterward. How everything changes, and your family. Are they okay?" Sarah looked down at her coffee cup. "They survived, but we don't talk much." David didn't press. He simply nodded, respecting her space. And that was the moment Sarah realized something. She wasn't alone. There were people who understood, people who didn't judge. Sarah and David began spending more time together. It wasn't exactly dating at first, more like a deep friendship between two people who worked with human pain and needed someone who understood. But over time, it turned into something more. In 2009, when Sarah was 22 and finishing her master's degree in social work at Sac State, David proposed. It was simple, with no pomp. They were walking along the Sacramento River at sunset when David stopped, took her hand, and said, "Sarah, you're the strongest person I know, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side. Will you marry me?" He had no ring, no grand gesture, but he had sincerity, and that was all Sarah needed. "Yes," she answered, crying. "Yes, I will." They were married in October 2009 in a small ceremony at a public garden. Only a few close friends were present. Sarah invited her parents, but they didn't come. Thomas said he couldn't leave work. Margaret didn't even answer the phone. Sarah tried not to let it destroy her. She had David now. She had a new family. The following years were the best of Sarah's life. She and David rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in Sacramento, in the Midtown neighborhood, a charming area with cafes, bookstores, and tree-lined sidewalks. Sarah got a full-time job as a clinical social worker working with at-risk children through the Sacramento County Department of Human Services. It was emotionally exhausting work handling cases of abuse, neglect, families broken by addiction and poverty, but Sarah was excellent at it. She had a unique ability to connect with traumatized children. She understood fear, guilt, the feeling of being abandoned, because she had lived through all of it. In 2012, Sarah gave birth to her first child, Noah Mitchell Chen, a healthy boy with brown eyes and chubby cheeks. She chose the name thinking of new beginnings, of new lives after floods. David cried with joy, holding his son for the first time. 2 years later, in 2014, Emma Mitchell Chen was born, a girl with dark hair and curious eyes. Now they were 4, a real family. Sarah was a devoted mother, but not suffocating. She wanted her children to have the childhood she never had, safe, loving, stable. She read to them every night, took Noah to play soccer at the park, taught Emma to draw and paint. David was a wonderful father, always playful and present. For the first time in her life, Sarah Mitchell felt she had built something good, something no one could burn. She rarely thought of Meadowbrook, rarely thought of the fire, rarely thought of her parents. She had buried all of it deep inside, locked with multiple keys. But every now and then, especially during Sacramento's hot summers, when the thermometer climbed past 100 degrees Fahrenheit and the news warned of wildfire risks, Sarah smelled smoke even when there was none. She woke in the middle of the night, sweating, dreaming of flames devouring a wooden house, dreaming of voices calling her name, dreaming of impossible choices. David noticed. He always noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked, holding her hand in the dark. "Just a nightmare. I'm fine. Do you want to talk about it?" "No, I just need to sleep." David never pressed, but Sarah knew he worried. She knew he noticed the moments when she grew distant, lost in memories she didn't share. In 2018, 15 years after the fire, Sarah finally decided to try reconnecting with her parents. Not for them, but for her children. Noah was 6. Emma was 4. They deserved to know their grandparents, even if those grandparents were difficult. Sarah found Thomas's auto shop number online. She took a deep breath and called. A rough, tired voice answered, "Mitchell's Auto Repair." "Dad, it's me, Sarah." A long silence. "Sarah, how are you?" "Old, tired, working, and Mom. She passed away." Sarah's world stopped. "What? When?" 2 years ago, 2016. Heart attack. Smoked too much, took too many pills. The doctors said it was expected. Sarah felt tears fall before she could fully process the information. "Why didn't you tell me? I didn't have your number. You disappeared, remember?" "I didn't disappear. I tried calling so many times. You never wanted to talk, and now you call." "After how many years? 13, 14? "I tried. Dad, I tried." Silence again. It was on a Sunday. She was watching TV. When I got home from work, she was on the couch, dead. It's been 2 years now. Sarah didn't know what to say. She felt a deep, strange grief-like mourning, someone she had already lost long ago. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Yeah, me too." And then he hung up. Sarah sat on her living room couch, staring at the phone, crying silently. David found her like that and held her, letting her cry on his shoulder without asking anything. Sarah never called her father again. And he never called her. The years kept passing. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024. Sarah entered her 30s, then approached 40s. Her hair began showing a few gray strands. Fine lines appeared around her eyes. Noah was now a 12-year-old preteen, obsessed with video games and basketball. Emma was 10 and loved to read, especially fantasy stories. Sarah had advanced in her career. She was now a social work supervisor at the department, managing a team of 8 social workers and overseeing more than 100 active cases of children at risk. It was stressful but rewarding work. She was making a difference. She was saving lives. Life was good, stable, normal, and then, one September morning in 2025, everything collapsed again. Sarah was at her desk in the office, reviewing case reports, when her assistant, Linda Martinez, knocked on the door. "Sarah, there's a delivery for you." Personal looks official. Linda handed her a large brown envelope with the seal of the Superior Court of California, County of Fresno, printed in the upper left corner. Sarah frowned. Official. She opened the envelope with a letter opener and pulled out a stack of stapled documents. The first page read, in large black letters, "Court summons civil action plaintiffs. Thomas Harold Mitchell. Defendant Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell Chen." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands began to tremble. She turned the page and read the document, each word landing like a hammer. Her father was suing her. He claimed that, on August 22, 2003, during the emergency evacuation of the Meadowbrook wildfire, Sarah deliberately abandoned her parents in imminent danger, preventing them from saving vital documents and items of inestimable value. He claimed that her intentional negligence and cowardice resulted in irreparable financial losses estimated at $850,000, including property deeds, insurance policies, family heirlooms, and potential claims lost due to lack of proper documentation. He demanded total reparations of $850,000, plus attorney's fees and court costs. Sarah read the document 3 times, unable to believe it. Her own father was suing her for having saved herself. For surviving. 22 years later, he was blaming her officially, legally, publicly. Sarah dropped the documents on the desk, ran to the bathroom, and vomited. She spent the rest of that September day in shock. She canceled her meetings, asked Linda to reschedule everything, and left the office early. She drove on autopilot through Sacramento's streets, barely noticing stoplights, horns, or traffic. When she got home, it was only 3:30 p.m. The kids were still at school. David was still at work. She walked into the empty apartment, dropped her bag on the couch, and sat at the kitchen table with the court documents spread in front of her. She reread each page slowly, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. The lawsuit wasn't just a legal dispute. It was a moral accusation. Each paragraph dripped with venom. The defendant, then 16 years of age, panicked during the evacuation and abandoned her parents under conditions of extreme danger, despite having been instructed to assist in retrieving vital documents. As a direct result of the defendant's negligence and cowardice, the plaintiffs lost property deeds valued at approximately $320,000, insurance documents that prevented full claims, and irreplaceable family items of sentimental and monetary value. The defendant demonstrated flagrant disregard for the safety and well-being of her parents, prioritizing her own survival over the family's needs. Sarah felt nausea rise again. She ran to the bathroom and vomited for the second time that day. When she returned, wiping her mouth with a paper towel, her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the glass of water she tried to drink. How could he do this? How could a father do this to his own daughter? She picked up the phone and called David. He answered on the third ring. "Hey love, everything okay?" "David, I need you to come home now." Sarah's voice was so full of anguish that David didn't ask questions. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When David arrived, he found Sarah still at the table, staring at the documents as if they were a death sentence. He read everything silently, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief and finally to anger. "This can't be real," he said, throwing the papers on the table. This is insane. He can't sue you for surviving a wildfire. He can, and he is. Sarah, you were 16. You begged them to leave. I remember you telling me," he says, "I panicked, that I stopped him from saving important things." "You saved his life," David nearly shouted. The whole house collapsed. "If you had stayed, you'd all be dead. I know that. You know that." But Sarah's voice broke. He never believed it. "All these years, he's blamed me. And now he wants me to pay." Literally, David pulled a chair and sat beside her, holding her hands. "We'll fight this. We'll hire the best lawyer we can afford. This won't stand in court. No judge in the world will buy this story." Sarah wanted to believe him, but part of her, the part that was still a 16-year-old girl being blamed by her own parents, doubted in the following days. Sarah and David consulted 3 different lawyers. The response was consistently the same. The lawsuit was absurd in its legal merits, but technically viable procedurally. That meant that, while it was unlikely Thomas would win, the case could indeed go to trial. And trials cost time, money, and mental health. The third lawyer they consulted, a 50-year-old woman named Rebecca Torres, specializing in family litigation, was the most direct. "Mrs. Chun, I'll be honest with you. Cases like this are usually attempts at emotional extortion disguised as legal litigation. Your father is probably betting that you'll want to avoid the trauma of a public trial and will offer a financial settlement." "Settlement," Sarah repeated, incredulous. "You want me to pay him for saving my own life?" "No, I want you to fight, but I need you to understand what's at stake. If this goes to a jury, you'll have to relive that night in detail. You'll have to sit in court and listen to your father testify against you. It will be emotionally devastating. So what do you recommend?" Rebecca leaned forward. "First, we'll file a motion to dismiss the case for lack of legal merit. If the judge agrees, it ends there. If not, we move to the discovery phase where we request documents, take depositions. I have a feeling your father is hiding something. People don't file lawsuits like this without a desperate reason." Sarah nodded slowly. "How much will this cost if it goes to trial?" "Between $50,000 and $80,000. Sarah felt her stomach sink. She and David had savings about $35,000 set aside for the kids' education, but using all of it, and more, to fight her own father felt surreal. David squeezed her hand. "We'll do whatever it takes." Rebecca Torres filed the motion to dismiss in October 2025. The hearing was scheduled for November. During that month of waiting, Sarah could barely function. She went to work, but was constantly distracted. She smiled at her children, but the smile never reached her eyes. Noah and Emma could tell something was wrong. "Mom, are you sad?" Emma asked one night, as Sarah tucked her into bed. Sarah forced a smile. "A little, sweetheart, but it'll pass." "Is it because of Grandpa?" Sarah froze. "Why do you ask that? I heard you and Daddy talking. You said his name." Sarah sighed and stroked Emma's hair. "Adults sometimes have complicated problems, honey, but it's nothing you need to worry about, okay? Daddy and I will handle it." Emma nodded, but her eyes still looked worried. Sarah kissed her forehead and turned off the light. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She didn't want this to affect her children. They didn't deserve to carry this pain. The motion hearing took place on November 18, 2025, at the Fresno County Superior Court. Sarah had to drive 2.5 hours back to Fresno, a city she had avoided for nearly 20 years. Seeing the Route 41 signs made her heart race. Seeing the surrounding hills, now green again but still scarred with old fire marks, made her breathing uneven. David drove. She couldn't have managed. The courthouse was an imposing concrete and glass building in downtown Fresno. Inside, the halls echoed with footsteps and muffled conversations between lawyers and clients. Sarah and David sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, waiting to be called. That's when Sarah saw him. Thomas Mitchell. He was at the end of the hall, speaking with a man in a suit, presumably his lawyer. Thomas looked much older than Sarah remembered. He was hunched, too thin, his hair completely white, his skin marked by years of labor under the sun. He wore a cheap suit that didn't fit well. His hands, even from a distance, looked shaky. He looked up, and his eyes met Sarah's. For a moment, neither of them moved. The entire hallway seemed to disappear. It was just father and daughter, separated by 22 years of silence and pain. Thomas looked away first and returned to talking with his lawyer. Sarah felt as if she had been punched. David gripped her hand tightly, breathed. "You're stronger than this." The hearing lasted less than 30 minutes. Judge Andrew Harmon, a 60-year-old man with reading glasses and a permanently tired expression, heard arguments from both sides. Rebecca Torres was eloquent and precise. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally flawed. The defendant was a minor in a life-threatening emergency. She had no legal obligation to risk her own safety to save property. Furthermore, the statute of limitations for any negligence claim has long expired. I request that this case be dismissed with prejudice." Thomas's lawyer, a thin man in his 40s named Gerald Finch, argued, "Your Honor, this is not a simple negligence case. It is a matter of intentional abandonment that resulted in specific, measurable financial damages. The plaintiffs can demonstrate that, due to the defendant's actions, they were prevented from recovering vital documents that would have allowed full insurance claims and other benefits." The judge listened, occasionally taking notes. Finally, he removed his glasses and sighed. "I will review the briefs submitted by both parties and issue a written decision within 15 days. This hearing is adjourned." And that was it. No big revelation. No dramatic confrontation. Just cold, efficient legal procedure. As everyone stood to leave, Sarah looked at her father again. Thomas was putting papers into an old folder. He looked small, diminished, but when he looked back at her, his eyes still carried the same hardness as always. 2 weeks later, the decision arrived by email. Rebecca called Sarah immediately. "Bad news. The judge denied our motion." Sarah felt her world collapse. "How? Why?" He said there are enough factual issues that need to be examined at trial. Basically, he wants to hear full testimony before making a final decision. That means we're moving to discovery, and eventually, to a jury. "Rebecca, I can't do this. I can't sit in a courtroom." And Sarah, "Listen, I know it's hard, but now we have an advantage. In discovery, we can request all your father's financial records from the last 22 years. Insurance records, tax returns, everything. If he's lying about anything, and I believe he is, we'll find it." Sarah took a deep breath. "Okay, what do you need from me?" "First, I need you to write a detailed account of everything you remember from that night. Every detail. Times, conversations, actions. Second, I need names of anyone who can testify on your behalf. Neighbors, friends, anyone who was there. Most of the people I knew in Meadowbrook probably don't live there anymore. The town was destroyed. Then let's find them. Let's track down survivors, firefighters, anyone. And Sarah, yes, get ready, because this is going to get much worse before it gets better." The following months were a bureaucratic nightmare. Rebecca sent subpoenas for bank records, insurance records, tax documents. Thomas and his lawyer fought nearly every request, but the court eventually ordered the production of the documents. Meanwhile, Sarah began investigating on her own. She knew she needed witnesses. She needed people who could confirm that she hadn't abandoned her parents, that she had begged, screamed, tried to force them out. She started by searching online. She typed Meadowbrook fire survivors into Google and found several Facebook groups and memorial pages. There were hundreds of post-sold photos, stories, tributes to people who had died. Sarah scrolled for hours, reading accounts from other families who had lost everything. Many of the stories echoed her own, and then she saw a name she recognized, Jake Russo. Jake had been one of the boys at school that day, warning everyone about the approaching fire. Sarah clicked on his profile. Jake was now 40 years old, living in Bakersfield, working as a software engineer, and had 3 kids. His profile was full of family pictures, camping trips, and posts about technology. Sarah sent him a message. "Hi Jake, I don't know if you remember me. I'm Sarah Mitchell, from Meadowbrook High. We were there on the day of the fire in 2003. I know it's been a long time, but I really need to talk to you about that day. Can you call me? It's important." She sent similar messages to 3 other people she recognized in the groups. Amy Chen, her old friend, Mr. Daniels the bus driver, and Karen Stevens, the nurse at the shelter. Amy replied within hours. "Sarah, oh my God, it's been so long. Of course I remember you. I think of you often. Call me when you can." Sarah called Amy that night. The two talked for nearly 2 hours. Amy still lived in California, now in San Diego, working as an elementary school teacher. She remembered clearly giving Sarah a ride that day, seeing the smoke swallow the sky, the panic in the streets. "Sarah, I never forgot that day," Amy said, her voice emotional. "It was terrifying. I still have nightmares sometimes. But you were always so strong. Even after losing everything, you kept going." "Amy, I need to tell you something, and I need your help." Sarah explained everything: the lawsuit, the accusations, the need for witnesses. Amy was silent for a long moment. "Your father is doing this. Your own father. Yes, Sarah, that's sick. You saved his life. I'll testify. I'll say everything I remember, and I'll do whatever you need. Sarah felt tears fall. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much. Jake Rousseau also responded a few days later. They spoke on the phone, and Jake recalled surprising details from that day: how dark the smoke was, how everyone was terrified, how the school was evacuated in total panic. Sarah, I remember you. You were always quiet, always helping others. If you need me to testify, I will, no doubt. Mr. Daniels, unfortunately, had passed away in 2019, but Sarah found his daughter, Monica Daniels, who remembered that her father had talked about that day for years. Monica agreed to testify about what her father had said. Karen Stevens, the shelter nurse, was retired but still lived in Fresno. When Sarah found her and explained the situation, Karen was outraged. I remember you, dear. You were just a child trying to hold everything together while your parents fell apart. If they're blaming you now, it's because they need someone to blame for their own misery. I'll go to court, and I'll say exactly that. In March 2026, Rebecca received Thomas's financial documents that had been ordered by the court. She called Sarah late at night, her voice carrying something Sarah couldn't immediately identify. Sarah, you need to sit down. What did you find? Your father lied. About everything. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart racing. What do you mean? The State Farm records show he received the full insurance payout. He claimed in the lawsuit that the insurance didn't cover everything due to lack of documentation. Right lie? He received $425,000 in September 2004. Full payout for the house, contents, everything. Sarah was speechless. But, he always said, I know what he said. But look, the bank records show he received the money. And then, over the next 3 years, he spent almost all of it. Gambling, casinos, bad loans to expand the business that never worked. By 2007, he was bankrupt again. He wasted the insurance money. Exactly. And now, 20 years later, he's desperate. He's in debt. The shop is about to be foreclosed, and he decided to blame you and try to squeeze money out of you. Sarah felt a mix of anger, sadness, and strange relief. Finally, there was proof. Proof that none of this was her fault? Is that enough to win the case, Sarah? That's enough to destroy his case? And maybe even sue him for bad faith litigation. But there's more. I found records of a psychiatric evaluation your father underwent in 2005, mandated by a social worker after your mother was hospitalized for an accidental medication overdose. The report says he displayed patterns of obsessive thinking, externalized blame, and difficulty processing trauma. Basically, Sarah, your father has untreated psychological problems, and he's projecting his guilt onto you. Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What do we do now? Now we go to court, and we show the truth. The trial was scheduled for May 15, 2026, nearly 8 months after Sarah had received the initial summons. 8 months of sleepless nights, of emergency therapy to cope with resurfacing trauma, of difficult conversations with Noah and Emma about why mom had been so sad lately. 8 months of reliving the worst night of her life, over and over in her mind, preparing for the moment she would have to relive it aloud, under oath, in front of strangers. David took leave from work to be with her through the entire trial. They left the kids with David's parents in Sacramento. They didn't want Noah and Emma to see any of this. This wasn't something children should witness. On the morning of the first day of trial, Sarah woke at 4:30 a.m., unable to sleep any longer. She took a long hot shower, put on a conservative navy blue suit Rebecca had recommended, tied her hair in a simple bun, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was 38. She had fine lines around her eyes, a few gray strands at her temples, but beneath it all, Sarah could still see the 16-year-old girl. Terrified, running through smoke, making impossible choices. Are you ready? David asked, appearing behind her in the reflection. No, Sarah answered honestly, but let's go anyway. The Fresno County Superior Court was packed when they arrived. Rebecca had warned her that cases like this drew attention, especially from the local media, and she was right. There were 2 reporters from the Fresno B, and a camera crew from a local TV station in the hallway. A reporter approached Sarah with a microphone. Mrs. Chen, do you have any comment on your father's accusations? Rebecca immediately intercepted, no comments until the end of the trial. Please respect my client's privacy. They hurried past the cameras and into the courtroom. It was a formal, intimidating space-high ceiling, dark wood-paneled walls, the seal of the state of California hanging behind the judge's bench. There were wooden benches for the public, already half full with onlookers and journalists. And, at the front, 2 tables, one for the defense and one for the plaintiff. Sarah sat beside Rebecca at the defense table. Across the room, she saw Thomas enter with his lawyer, Gerald Finch. Her father looked worse than last time, thinner, more hunched. His skin yellowed, like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in months. He avoided looking at her completely. At 9 o'clock sharp, the bailiff announced, "All rise. The Superior Court of Fresno County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Andrew Harmon presiding." The judge entered, wearing the traditional black robes, and everyone sat. He looked over the room, adjusted his glasses, and began, Good morning. We are here for the civil trial in the case of Mitchell versus Chen. We will proceed with opening statements. Mr. Finch, you may begin. Gerald Finch stood, adjusted his tie, and walked to the jury. 12 citizens of Fresno County, selected days earlier, their expressions ranging from curiosity to boredom. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about responsibility. It's about the consequences of decisions made in critical moments. On August 22, 2003, my client, Thomas Mitchell, lost everything. His home, his belongings, and most importantly, vital documents that represented his family's financial security. And he lost all of this because his daughter, the defendant, Sarah Mitchell Chen, panicked and forced him to abandon his property before he could save what was essential. Finch paused dramatically. The defendant was 16 years old. She was young, yes, but she was not a child. She was capable of understanding instructions, and the instructions were clear. Help save important documents before evacuating. Instead, she panicked. She screamed. She created chaos. And as a direct result of her actions, my client lost property, deeds, original insurance policies, and irreplaceable family items. These losses resulted in measurable financial damages of at least $850,000. We will prove this to you through testimony and documents. Thank you. He sat down. Sarah felt nausea rise, but Rebecca squeezed her hand under the table, reassuring her. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She stood, confident, and walked to the jury with a warm smile. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I represent Sarah Mitchell Chen. I'll be direct with you. This case should not be here. This is the story of a 16-year-old girl who saved her parents' lives during one of the worst natural disasters in California's history. And 22 years later, she's being sued for saving those lives. Rebecca, let that settle. Mr. Finch wants you to believe that Sarah panicked and forced her father out. The truth? Sarah begged. She screamed. She did everything she could to convince her parents to evacuate while a 50-foot wall of flames advanced toward their home. And when they finally left seconds, literally seconds before the house collapsed, they all survived. That's not negligence. That's heroism. Rebecca opened a folder. Moreover, we will prove to you that Mr. Mitchell received the full insurance payout. He didn't lose money due to missing documents. He received $425,000 in 2004, and he spent it all on bad financial decisions, on gambling, on failed business ventures, and now, bankrupt and desperate, he is trying to blame his own daughter. We will show you the bank records, we will show you the insurance payments, and we will show you the truth. Rebecca returned to the table and sat. Sarah took a deep breath. It was beginning. The first 2 days of the trial were dedicated to Thomas Mitchell's testimony. Gerald Finch led him through a carefully crafted narrative describing the house, the property inherited from his father, the documents he kept in a cabinet in the bedroom, the importance of those papers. Mr. Mitchell, on the day of the fire, what were you trying to do before evacuating? Finch asked. Thomas, sitting in the witness chair, looked small and frail. He spoke in a trembling voice. I was trying to save my documents. The house deeds my father left me. The insurance policies, birth certificates, everything was in a filing cabinet in my room. I just needed a few more minutes to grab everything and put it in the truck. And what happened? My daughter, Sarah, she started screaming that we had to leave immediately. She was hysterical, crying, screaming. She pulled me, pushed me out. I said I needed more time, but she wouldn't listen. And the consequences of that. Thomas lowered his head. I lost everything. The documents burned. When I tried to file the insurance claim, they said without originals, without policy numbers, it would take months, maybe years. In the end, they only paid a fraction of what the property was worth. It was a convincing performance. Sarah could see some jurors nodding sympathetically. Then it was Rebecca's turn for cross-examination. Mr. Mitchell, you testified that your daughter was hysterical, correct? Yes. And what was the external situation at that time? Thomas hesitated. There was smoke and fire in the distance. In the distance. Mr. Mitchell, isn't it true that the forest behind your house was already burning when your daughter found you? I don't know exactly. Rebecca picked up a document. Allow me to refresh your memory. This is a report from the California Department of Forestry on the Meadowbrook fire. It documents that at 4:37 p.m., 7 minutes before your family evacuated, the flames had already consumed the forest area immediately adjacent to your property. The report uses the words catastrophic advance, with spread speed exceeding 60 miles per hour. Mr. Mitchell, your daughter wasn't being hysterical. She was trying to save your life. Thomas didn't respond. Mr. Mitchell, you testified that the insurance paid only a fraction of the property's value. Is that correct? Yes. Rebecca picked up another document and handed it to the clerk to distribute to the jury. This is the payment record from State Farm Insurance to Mr. Thomas Mitchell, dated September 18, 2004. What's written here? Mr. Mitchell. Thomas looked at the paper, pale. $425,000. $425,000. Does that sound like a fraction to you, sir? The house was worth more. According to county assessments in 2003, your house was valued at $380,000. You received $45,000 more than the appraised value. That's not a fraction. That's full payment, plus contents and relocation expenses. The jury began murmuring. Gerald Finch stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is arguing, not questioning. Sustained. Miss Torres, ask questions, the judge said. Rebecca nodded. Mr. Mitchell, what happened to the $425,000? I used it to rebuild my life. Rebuild or waste? Rebecca picked up a stack of bank statements. These are your bank records from 2004 to 2007. They show transactions at casinos in Las Vegas, high-risk loans, investments in multi-level marketing schemes that collapsed. In 3 years, you spent nearly all the insurance money. It wasn't your daughter who destroyed your financial life, Mr. Mitchell. It was you. Thomas had no answer. He just looked down at his hands. Rebecca returned to the table. No further questions. In the following days, Rebecca presented her witnesses. Amy Chen testified about seeing Sarah that day, about the panic in the town, about how it was clear that anyone who didn't evacuate immediately was in mortal danger. Jake Russo testified about the conditions at school, about how everyone knew the fire was out of control. Karen Stevens, the shelter nurse, was devastating. I worked with hundreds of survivors in that shelter, and I can say with certainty, Sarah Mitchell was a traumatized young girl trying to hold her family together while her parents fell apart. If anyone is to be held accountable for that night, it's not her. Finally, Rebecca called Sarah to the stand. Sarah walked to the witness chair with trembling legs. She took the oath, sat, and looked at the jury. 12 unfamiliar faces looking back, judging her. Rebecca guided her through the story. Sarah described the day of the fire in painful detail, the heat, the smoke, the fear, the pleas to her parents to leave, their refusal, the final desperation, the race against time. Sarah, when you decided to leave the house, how did you feel? Sarah felt the tears coming, but this time she didn't hold them back. I felt like I was betraying them, like I was giving up. But I saw the flames. I saw the house catching fire, and I knew that if I stayed, I would die. And maybe they would too. So I ran. And I never forgave myself for it. Why not? Because my parents never forgave me. For 22 years, they blamed me. And part of me always believed they were right. That if I had been stronger, faster, smarter, I could have saved everything. Rebecca stepped closer. Sarah, you saved what mattered. You saved lives, including your own. Sarah nodded, now crying openly. Gerald Finch tried to attack her in cross-examination, but his questions sounded hollow compared to Sarah's raw emotion. When he asked if she had really tried to help her father save the documents, Sarah replied firmly, I tried to save my family, and I did. I'm sorry if that wasn't enough for him. Closing statements came on the 6th day of the trial. Gerald Finch made an emotional plea about family responsibility and respect for parents. Rebecca made an even more powerful plea about trauma, survival, and the cruelty of blaming a victim. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a Hispanic man in his early 50s, handed the verdict to the judge. Judge Harmon read silently, then looked at the room. In the case of Mitchell versus Chen, the jury has unanimously decided in favor of the defendant. The lawsuit is dismissed in its entirety. Furthermore, the court orders the plaintiff to pay the defendant's legal costs in the amount of $67,000. Due to the frivolous nature of this action, Sarah felt her legs give way. David caught her. Rebecca smiled, squeezing her shoulder. Across the room, Thomas Mitchell didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the table in front of him, defeated. After the trial, outside the courthouse, Sarah saw her father leaving alone. Gerald Finch was already gone. Thomas was walking slowly toward an old pickup truck parked at the end of the block. Sarah didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the need for closure. But she pulled away from David and ran after him. Dad, wait. Thomas stopped, but didn't turn. Sarah stopped a few feet behind him. Why did you do this? Why did you blame me for so long? Thomas was silent for a long time. Then, with a broken voice, he said, because it was easier to blame you than to blame myself. Sarah felt the tears return. Blame yourself for what? Thomas finally turned. His eyes were red. For not listening to you, for being stubborn, for putting old papers above my daughter's life. I knew you were right. I always knew. But admitting that I almost killed us all out of pride, I couldn't. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Your mother knew. Before she died, she told me it was all my fault, that I had destroyed the family, and she was right. I spent the insurance money trying to prove that I could rebuild, that I could be someone, but I failed at everything. And when the debts came, when I was going to lose everything again, I thought that if I could legally, officially blame you, maybe I could convince myself it wasn't my fault. Sarah didn't know what to feel. Anger, pity, relief. You destroyed my life, Dad. You made me believe I was a coward, that I had abandoned you. I know, Thomas whispered, and I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything now, but I am sorry. Sarah took a deep breath. You're right, it doesn't mean anything. She turned and walked back to David, who was waiting at the top of the courthouse stairs. She didn't look back. 6 months later, November 2026, Sarah was in the kitchen of her home in Sacramento, preparing Thanksgiving dinner. Noah was setting the table. Emma was drawing thank you cards for everyone. David was roasting the turkey, filling the house with the smell of rosemary and butter. Life had returned to normal, or at least to a new version of normal. Sarah still went to therapy weekly to process everything. But she was better, lighter, as if a weight she had carried for 23 years had finally been lifted from her shoulders. The phone rang. Sarah looked at the screen. It was an unknown number from Fresno. She answered hesitantly. "Hello?" A female voice responded. "Mrs. Chen, this is Dr. Patricia Reeves from Fresno Regional Medical Center. I'm sorry to inform you that your father, Thomas Mitchell, was admitted this morning. He suffered a stroke. He is in stable condition, but he is asking to speak with you." Sarah closed her eyes. Part of her wanted to hang up. Another part, the part that was still a 16-year-old girl desperately wanting to be loved by her parents, hesitated. "Will he survive?" "Yes, but he is fragile. If you want to come, it would be today or tomorrow." Sarah hung up and stood still, holding the phone. David appeared behind her. Was it him? Hospital. He had a stroke. "Are you going?" Sarah looked at the children in the dining room, laughing as they played. She looked at the prepared table. She looked at the life she had built. "No," she finally said. "I saved him once. I don't need to do it again." David hugged her. "It's okay. You don't owe him anything." Sarah nodded against David's chest, feeling peace for the first time in decades. She had survived the fire. She had survived the guilt. And now, finally, she was free. If this story touched your heart, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional and true stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that we are not responsible for the choices other people make, even when those people are our family. And tell me in the comments, could you forgive? Or are there wounds that never fully heal? Life is complicated, and everyone deals with trauma in a different way. But always remember, you are not defined by the worst day of your life. You are defined by how you choose to keep living after it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.